It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. I gather you remember the 2016 presidential campaign when Donald Trump told us with this memorable rhetoric about draining the swamp in Washington.
I want everyone in Washington to hear and to heed the words that we all say together. If we win on November 8th, we are going to drain the swamp in Washington, D.C. We're draining the swamp.
Well, he did win on November 8th. And when all eyes were on Trump the first few days in office, he did follow up quickly on what he was promising by signing an executive order just a week after he got into office on January 28, 2017. The executive order was to prevent lobbyists from joining his administration to work on issues that they have previously lobbied on. So, a year and almost a few months out, let's examine how well this order is being executed on. Many watchdogs in Washington are alarmed at epic ethic violations on the Hill. Here's Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Over and over again, he has promised to drain the swamp, but then appointed an army of lobbyists and industry insiders to positions overseeing the industries that paid them for years.
Public Citizen, an advocacy organization looking out for our rights, has identified at least 36 former lobbyists who are now working in Trump's administration that are working on issues for which they have recently lobbied, and only 6 of them have gotten a waiver from Trump thus far. So on to talk about this with me is Craig Holman. He is a government affairs lobbyist for Public Citizen in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining me, Craig.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
All right, Craig, you have filed 30 complaints against the Trump administration and its officials for violating Trump's own executive order. What are your complaints and what are some of the most egregious violations you have filed?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I want to highlight that this is just the tip of the iceberg. I was able to identify only about a quarter of all presidential appointees, and I ran through a quarter of those. And amongst those, I found these 36 violations. So I suspect the real number is fourfold over that. But some of the classic examples. I mean, there's, for instance, George David Banks, who lobbied on energy before he was appointed, right before he was appointed as Trump's special assistant to the president on energy. Or there's William Green, who also lobbied on energy, who was appointed, and environmental issues, and who was appointed by Trump to be the special assistant to the president on energy and the environment. Or we have Gilbert Kaplan, who lobbied on trade issues, and he is the undersecretary of trade. All of these examples appear to be, very clear violations of Trump's own ethics rules. If I can back up and explain Trump's ethics executive order, there's several elements to it. There are 2 key elements, though, that I do want to highlight. One is Trump, as part of his Drain the Swamp campaign, it declared that no lobbyists will be appointed to the Trump administration. And the second one is that if a former lobbyist is appointed to the Trump administration, they're not to be appointed to positions that oversee the same specific issue area that they had lobbied on within the previous 2 years. When we talk about the first provision of no lobbyists in the Trump administration, all he means is you have to deregister as a lobbyist on Monday and you can be appointed to the Trump administration on Tuesday. And as a result, my looking at all presidential appointees, or a quarter of them, I found that roughly about 25% of all appointees into the Trump administration are former lobbyists. So lobbyists are swarming into the Trump administration. And then when we talk about that second element, that if you were a former lobbyist, you're not supposed to be appointed to a position that oversees the same issue area that you had just lobbied on. I found, 36 that have been appointed to the same issue area that they had just lobbied on. Now, only 6 of them have received waivers, so that left 30 that appear to be in direct violation of Trump's own ethics rules. And so those are the 30 that 30 complaints that I filed with the individual ethics officers all across the administration, from Homeland Security to the Department of Transportation to the Department of Energy to the Treasury Department. I found all these abuses of Trump's own ethics rules.
And are these different from those more high-profile people? For example, the former Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, who had come from the oil industry. He was an executive at Exxon. Then becomes, I'm not saying he's a registered lobbyist in Washington, but certainly Exxon had people registered as lobbyists in Washington. But then he becomes a Secretary of State and responsible for trade and so forth. Would you consider somebody like him in the realm of violation of a code of ethics there?
Well, certainly a conflict of interest exists there, but it's not grounds enough for me to file an ethics complaint because I have to focus on what the ethics rules actually are. And Trump's ethics executive order focuses on registered lobbyists. So that's what I have to look at. Rex Tillerson, conflicts of interest, no doubt, but he was never a registered lobbyist, so it doesn't run afoul of this ethics executive order.
Craig, compare this to what happened with the Obama administration. So we know that key figures in the Obama administration, John Podesta, for example, had a direct conflict of interest in terms of being at the White House and his and his brother's company, Podesta Group, being lobbyists, registered lobbyists in Washington. Now, how does what is going on in the Trump administration weigh against what happened in the Obama administration?
Well, the Obama administration, Obama actually took these ethics rules seriously. He's the one actually who created these ethics rules. The first day that Obama stepped into the White House, he issued his ethics executive order, which was the first one ever that's ever come out, identifying a what I call a reverse revolving door. And that is trying to manage the inherent conflicts of interest of presidential appointees, people who come into the administration. Obama set up the rule of saying, first of all, if you lobbied a specific agency within the last 2 years, you're not going to be appointed to that agency. That was Obama's rule. He also then had this rule that I'm focusing on, that if you were a former lobbyist who lobbied on a specific issue area, you can't be appointed to any position that oversees that issue area. And Obama really, for the most part, lived by those rules. He issued a total in his administration, when it comes to lobbyist waivers, of 6 lobbying waivers. That was it. We've already seen 3 times that being issued by Trump, and that's when Trump finally recognizes that there is a conflict of interest. So Obama, for the most part, really did live by it. I may have several complaints against the Obama administration, but one thing that Obama really did do well was ethics. It was, for the most part, a scandal-free administration. Compare that to the Trump administration, which is probably going to be the most scandal-ridden administration in history.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network.